Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the corner booth of Murphy's bar, nursing a glass of water and watching the Friday night crowd filter in. The small town of Bridgeport, Virginia hadn't changed much in the 3 years she'd been away. Same worn wooden floors, same neon beer signs casting colored shadows across the walls, same faces she'd grown up knowing. She'd only been back for 2 weeks, and already she could feel the weight of small-town judgment settling on her shoulders like an old, familiar coat. "Sarah Mitchell, as I live and breathe," came a voice from across the bar. She looked up to see Tommy Brennan, her high school classmate, approaching with a cocky grin. He'd put on weight since graduation, and his navy polo shirt stretched tight across his belly. "Heard you were back in town. Military didn't work out for you, huh?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, something like that. Tommy slid into the booth across from her without being invited. "Yeah, my buddy's sister tried the army thing. Lasted about 6 months before she came running home. It's tough out there, especially for, you know." He gestured vaguely at her. "For women," Sarah finished for him. "Hey, I'm just being real." Tommy held up his hands in mock defense. "Not everybody's cut out for that life. Nothing to be ashamed of. You gave it a shot." Sarah took a slow sip of her water, saying nothing. She'd learned a long time ago that some arguments weren't worth having. "So what are you doing now?" Tommy pressed. "Your mom told my mom you're looking for work. My uncle runs a real estate office downtown. I could put in a good word, maybe get you a receptionist position or something." "I appreciate the offer," Sarah said quietly, "but I'm fine." Tommy leaned back, his grin widening. "Come on, Sarah. You've been gone 3 years, you come back with no job, no plan. Word around town is you couldn't hack it. But hey, at least you tried, right? That's more than most girls around here do." Before Sarah could respond, another voice cut through the conversation. "This seat taken." Both Sarah and Tommy looked up. A man in his early 30s stood beside the booth, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of rigid posture that screamed military. His dark hair was cut short, and his sharp blue eyes held an intensity that made Tommy shift uncomfortably. "Actually, we're having a private conversation," Tommy said. The stranger ignored him, his gaze fixed on Sarah. "You look like you could use better company." Sarah felt something flicker in her chest, recognition, maybe, or understanding. She could spot one of her own from a mile away. "The seat's open," she said. Tommy scoffed. "Seriously, I'm trying to help you out here, Sarah, and you're just gonna." "The lady said the seat's open," the stranger repeated, his voice dropping to a lower register. "That's your cue to move along." For a moment Tommy looked like he might argue, then he seemed to think better of it. "Whatever. Good luck with your life, Sarah. You're gonna need it." He stood and stalked away, throwing one last glare over his shoulder. The stranger slid into the vacated seat. "Mind if I ask what that was about?" "Small-town politics," Sarah said. "You learn to live with it." "Yeah, I know how that goes." He extended his hand across the table. "Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. Most people call me Jake." Sarah shook his hand, nodding the firm grip. "Sarah Mitchell." "You serve?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. 3 years, Sarah confirmed. "You?" 10 and counting. Navy. He paused, studying her face. "Let me guess, you came home and suddenly everybody's an expert on your life choices." Sarah felt a wry smile tug at her lips. "Something like that. They think I quit because I couldn't handle it." "Did you?" "Quit, yes, because I couldn't handle it." She shook her head slowly. "No." Jake nodded, asking nothing more. That was the thing about military people. They understood that some stories took time to tell, and some wounds needed space to breathe. "What brings you to Bridgeport?" Sarah asked, grateful for the change of subject. "Passing through, mostly. Got some business at Quantico, decided to take the scenic route." He gestured to the bartender for a beer. "Saw this place, figured I'd stop for a drink. Small towns usually have the best bars." They fell into easy conversation, the kind that flowed naturally between people who'd lived similar lives. Jake talked about his time in the Navy, carefully dancing around classified details. Sarah shared stories about growing up in Bridgeport, the mountains that surrounded the town, the lake where everyone went swimming in summer. An hour passed, then two. The bar filled with more people, voices rising in laughter and argument. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time since coming home, the knot of tension in her shoulders gradually loosening. Then Tommy reappeared, now accompanied by three friends. He'd been drinking, his face flushed and his steps unsteady. "Hey, Morrison, or whatever your name is," he called out loudly enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "You should know something about your new friend there." Jake's expression didn't change, not interested. "She's telling you war stories," Tommy continued, emboldened by liquid courage and his friend's presence. "Whatever she said, it's probably half true at best. Sarah here washed out of the military, couldn't cut it with the real soldiers." Several people in the bar had turned to watch now. Sarah felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice level. "Tommy, you're drunk. Go home." "I'm just telling the truth," Tommy insisted. "You were what, some kind of clerk, typing reports in an air-conditioned office somewhere?" Sarah said nothing, her jaw tightened. "That's what I thought." Tommy turned to his friends with a triumphant look. "She can't even defend herself." Jake set his beer down carefully on the table. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the now-silent bar. "You really want to do this?" Tommy puffed up his chest. "Do what? Tell the truth." "Yeah, I do. People in this town deserve to know who they're dealing with." "All right," Jake said. He turned to Sarah. "Mind if I ask you one question?" Sarah met his eyes, seeing something there she couldn't quite identify. "Go ahead." "What was your call sign?" The bar seemed to hold its breath. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her glass of water. She hadn't spoken those words out loud since the debriefing, since the medals ceremony she hadn't wanted, since the day she'd turned in her wings and walked away from the only life that had ever made sense. "Viper 1, she said quietly. Jake's beer stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes widened, and for a long moment he simply stared at her. Then slowly, he set the bottle down and stood up. "You're that Viper 1, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded once. Jake turned to face Tommy and the rest of the bar, his expression transformed. "You just called out Captain Sarah Mitchell, the most decorated Apache helicopter pilot of her generation. She flew 73 combat missions in 3 years. 73. She saved my entire unit in Kandahar when we were pinned down by enemy fire. I watched her take out 4 machine gun nests from a damaged bird while half her instruments were offline." The color drained from Tommy's face. Jake continued, his voice rising. "She's got 3 distinguished flying crosses, a silver star and a purple heart. The only reason she's not still flying is because she took shrapnel in her shoulder, saving lives. My life. And you have the audacity to stand there and say she couldn't cut it." The bar had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Sarah, who sat very still in the booth, her hands steady even as her world tilted sideways. "I didn't," Tommy stammered. "I didn't know." "That's right," Jake said coldly. "You didn't know. Maybe next time before you run your mouth you should ask some questions first." Part 2. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. The attention from every person in the bar felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. The recognition, the questions, the inevitable hero worship that always felt hollow because the people who deserved to be called heroes were the ones who never made it home. "I need some air," she said, brushing past Jake and heading for the door. She pushed through the entrance into the cool Virginia night, grateful for the darkness and the relative quiet. Behind her, she could hear Jake following, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. "Sarah, wait." She stopped at the edge of the parking lot, her back to him, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "You shouldn't have done that." He was out of line. "He was drunk and stupid," Sarah said, finally turning to face him. "There's a difference, and now everyone in that bar knows my business. I came back here to get away from all of that." Jake studied her in the dim light from the bar's windows. "Is that why you're home, to hide?" "I'm not hiding," Sarah shot back, defensive. "I'm recovering. There's a difference." "Is there?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her anger deflate, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that had become her constant companion over the past 6 months. "What do you want me to say, Jake? That I'm proud of what I did? That I wear my medals around town so everyone knows what a hero I am?" "I want you to stop pretending you're something you're not," Jake said quietly. "In there, you let that guy treat you like a failure, like you were nobody." "Maybe that's easier." "Easier than what?" Sarah looked away, her gaze settling on the dark outline of mountains in the distance. "Easier than explaining why I left. Easier than seeing the disappointment in people's eyes when they find out the great Viper one walked away from it all." "You didn't walk away, you were injured." "My shoulder healed." Sarah touched the spot reflexively, feeling the raised scar tissue beneath her shirt. "The doctors cleared me to fly again 2 months ago. I said no." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" The word echoed in the night air. Why? It was the same question Sarah had been asking herself every day since she'd turned down the return-to-duty order. Why couldn't she get back in the cockpit? Why did the thought of flying again make her hands shake and her heart race? Why had she traded the sky for the suffocating sameness of her childhood bedroom? "I lost someone," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "My co-pilot, Marcus Webb, we called him Webb." Jake moved closer, giving her space to continue or stop, whichever she needed. "It was supposed to be a routine supply run," Sarah continued. "No combat expected. Webb was 2 weeks away from rotation home. He had a wife and a baby girl he'd never met." Her voice caught. "We took fire. RPG clipped our tail rotor. I managed to keep us stable long enough for the emergency landing, but the impact—" She closed her eyes. "The impact was harder than I calculated. My restraints held. His didn't. Faulty equipment," they said later. "A buckle that should have been replaced months before." "That wasn't your fault," Jake said gently. "I was the pilot in command. Everything that happens in that bird is my fault." Sarah opened her eyes, looking directly at him. "You know what the worst part was? After we crashed, after I pulled him from the wreckage and tried to stop the bleeding, after the medics came and told me there was nothing anyone could have done, after all of that, they gave me a medal, another one to add to the collection, for exceptional airmanship under fire." She laughed bitterly. "They pinned it on my uniform while Webb's widow stood in the front row of the ceremony with their daughter. That baby girl will grow up without a father because a 50-cent buckle failed, and I got a piece of metal to hang on my wall." Jake didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply stood there, letting her words settle between them. "So yeah," Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "I came home. I let people like Tommy think whatever they want because it's easier than explaining that every time I close my eyes, I see Webb's face. I let them believe I quit because I couldn't handle it, because the truth, that I can't handle it anymore, is too close to the bone." The door to the bar opened, spilling light and music into the parking lot. A couple stumbled out, laughing, oblivious to the heavy conversation they'd interrupted. They climbed into a car and drove away, taillights disappearing down Main Street. "You want to know what I think?" Jake asked after the sound of the engine faded. "Do I have a choice?" A slight smile crossed his face. "I think you're one of the bravest pilots I've ever known. I think what you're going through is real and valid and has nothing to do with weakness. And I think hiding in this town, letting people like Tommy Brennan define who you are, is the one thing Webb wouldn't want for you." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "You didn't even know him." "No," Jake agreed. But I know pilots. I know the kind of person who would fly with Viper 1. And I'm guessing he'd want you to heal to find your way forward, whatever that looks like. Not to bury yourself alive in Bridgeport, Virginia. I don't know how to do that. Nobody does, Jake said. That's kind of the point, you figure it out as you go. They stood in silence for a while, the sounds of the bar muffled behind them. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening just a crack after being locked for months. I should probably go back in there, she said eventually. Face the music. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. Sarah straightened her shoulders, muscle memory from years of military bearing kicking in. If I slink away now, it'll just make things worse. Small towns have long memories. They walked back toward the bar together. As Sarah reached for the door handle, Jake spoke again. For what it's worth, I meant what I said in there. What you did in Kandahar, you saved my life and the lives of 16 other people. We all made it home because of you. That matters. That will always matter. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She pulled open the door and stepped back inside. The bar hadn't quite returned to normal. Conversations were quieter, more subdued, and several people glanced her way as she made her way back to the booth. Tommy and his friends had disappeared, probably slipping out the back door. Sarah slid into her seat and Jake sat across from her. The bartender, an older man named Frank who'd known Sarah since she was a kid, approached with 2 beers. On the house, he said gruffly, setting them down. Should have kicked Tommy out before he started running his mouth. I'm sorry about that, Sarah. It's all right, Frank. No, it's not. Frank shook his head. We all knew you'd gone off to serve, but I guess we didn't know. Well, thank you for your service, for what you did over there. Sarah gave him a small smile. Thank you, Frank. As the evening wore on, a few other people stopped by the table. Most were kind, if awkward, thanking her for her service or apologizing for Tommy's behavior. Sarah handled each interaction with grace, though she could feel the exhaustion building behind her eyes. Around midnight, the crowd began to thin. Jake finished his beer and stood to leave. I should hit the road. Got an early meeting at Quantico tomorrow. Thanks, Sarah said, for tonight, for understanding. Any time. Jake pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. If you ever need to talk, or if you're ever in the Norfolk area, look me up. Sarah took the card, running her thumb over the embossed text. I will. After Jake left, Sarah sat alone in the booth for a few more minutes, finishing her beer and gathering her thoughts. The bar felt different now, or maybe she felt different in it. The judgment she'd been so afraid of hadn't materialized. If anything, people seemed to look at her with respect, even admiration. But respect and admiration weren't what she needed. What she needed was purpose, a reason to get up in the morning that didn't involve staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom and wondering where everything had gone wrong. She left money on the table for her water and Jake's beers, despite Frank's insistence that they were free, and walked out into the night. The drive home took less than 10 minutes. Everything in Bridgeport was less than 10 minutes from everything else. She pulled into the driveway of her mother's small house, the porch light glowing yellow in the darkness. Her mother, Linda, was waiting up. She always did, no matter how many times Sarah told her not to. How was Murphy's? Linda asked as Sarah came through the door. Complicated, Sarah said, kicking off her shoes. I heard. Linda's expression was knowing. Betty Brennan called, said Tommy made a fool of himself. News travels fast. It always does. Linda stood from her chair, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her thin frame. She also said a Navy officer put him in his place, said some things about you, about what you did over there. Sarah sank onto the couch, suddenly bone-tired. Mom, I don't want to talk about it. I know you don't. Linda sat beside her, taking Sarah's hand in both of hers. But maybe it's time people around here knew the truth. Maybe it's time you stopped hiding it. I'm not hiding. Linda gave her a look that only mothers can give, the one that says, "I know you better than you know yourself." "Sweetheart, you've been home for 2 weeks. And you haven't left the house except to go to the grocery store. You won't return calls from your old friends. You spend all day in your room with the door closed. If that's not hiding, I don't know what is." Sarah knew her mother was right, but admitting it felt like losing something important. Sarah spent the weekend avoiding Main Street and the inevitable conversations that would follow Friday night's scene at Murphy's bar. She helped her mother with yard work, organized the garage, and did all the small household repairs that had piled up during her absence. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. But Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see a silver sedan in the driveway, not a car she recognized. Her mother had already left for her shift at the county library, so Sarah answered the door herself. A woman in her mid-40s stood on the porch, wearing a crisp business suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes held the sharp assessment of someone who made their living reading people. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked. "That's me. My name is Dr. Jennifer Caldwell. I'm the director of the Veterans Outreach Center in Roanoke." She offered her hand. "I was hoping we could talk." Sarah shook her hand warily. "About what?" "May I come in?" Against her better judgment, Sarah stepped aside and let the woman enter. They settled in the living room, Sarah on the couch and Dr. Caldwell in the armchair that had been her father's before he passed. "I'll get straight to the point," Dr. Caldwell began. "I was at Murphy's bar Friday night. I heard what was said about you and I did some research over the weekend." She opened her portfolio and pulled out several printed pages. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, call sign Viper 1. 3 distinguished flying crosses, a silver star, Purple Heart, and 73 combat missions. You're something of a legend in certain circles." "That's not why you're here," Sarah said. "No, it's not." Dr. Caldwell set the papers aside. "I'm here because our center is expanding our programs, and we need someone who understands what veterans are going through. Someone who's been there, someone with credibility." "You want to hire me?" "I want to offer you a position as a Veteran Services Coordinator. You'd work with returning soldiers, help them navigate the transition to civilian life, connect them with resources for employment, education, mental health services. The pay isn't great, but the work matters." Sarah felt something stir in her chest, interest, maybe, or just the shadow of it. "Why me? There must be plenty of veterans in the area." "There are," Dr. Caldwell agreed. "But most of them haven't accomplished what you have. When veterans come through our doors, they're often struggling, lost, wondering if they matter anymore. You can show them that someone who's been to the top of the mountain understands what they're going through, that their struggles are valid." "I'm not a therapist." "We have therapists. What we don't have is hope. You can provide that." Dr. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "I won't pretend to know what you're dealing with, Captain Mitchell, but I've worked with enough veterans to recognize someone who's trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe helping others find their way could help you find yours." Sarah looked down at her hands. They were steady now, but she remembered how they'd shaken in the cockpit that last day, how the controls had felt foreign in her grip, how the sky that had once been her home had suddenly felt like a trap. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I'm still figuring things out myself." "That's exactly why you're perfect for it." Dr. Caldwell pulled a business card from her portfolio and set it on the coffee table. "Take some time to think about it. The position doesn't start until next month anyway. Call me when you're ready." After Dr. Caldwell left, Sarah picked up the card and turned it over in her fingers. Veterans Outreach Center. She'd never considered work like that, had never imagined herself anywhere but in a cockpit. But the idea had planted itself in her mind, refusing to be dislodged. She was still thinking about it that afternoon when her phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Hello." Sarah Mitchell. The voice was male, older, with a slight southern drawl. "Speaking." "This is Colonel David Hartley, retired. I'm the president of the Bridgeport Veterans Association. I was wondering if you might be free for lunch tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Sarah almost said no. She'd spent years avoiding veteran groups, finding their meetings too full of stories she didn't want to relive and camaraderie that felt forced. But something in the colonel's tone made her pause. "What is this about?" "Let's talk over lunch," Hartley said. "My treat, the diner on Oak Street, noon tomorrow." "All right," Sarah heard herself say. "I'll be there." The next day, Sarah arrived at the diner 5 minutes early. Old habits died hard. Colonel Hartley was already there, sitting in a booth near the back. He was in his 70s, she guessed, with silver hair and the ramrod posture of a career military man. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Thank you for coming," he said as they sat down. "I'll admit I had to do some convincing to get your number. Your mother is protective." "She has reason to be." They ordered coffee and a club sandwich for Sarah, the lunch special for Hartley, and made small talk until the food arrived. Then Hartley got down to business. "I heard about what happened at Murphy's," he said. "Hell, the whole town heard about it. Tommy Brennan's been making himself scarce ever since, which is probably wise." He paused to sip his coffee. "But that's not why I asked you here." "Then why?" "The Veterans Association has been struggling lately," Hartley admitted. "Membership is down, our events aren't well attended, and we're having trouble connecting with younger veterans. The problem is, most of our members are Vietnam-era guys like me. We don't really know how to reach the Afghanistan and Iraq generation." "And you think I can help with that?" "I think you're exactly what we need," Hartley said bluntly. "A decorated combat pilot, young enough to relate to the newer veterans, respected enough that people will listen. We want to make you vice president of the association. Eventually, when I step down in a year or two, you take over as president." Sarah set down her sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone. "Colonel, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not a joiner. I never have been." "Neither was I at first," Hartley smiled slightly. "After Vietnam, I came home and wanted nothing to do with anything military. Spent 10 years working construction, drinking too much, keeping my head down. Then one day, a guy from the VFW knocked on my door and asked me to help him organize a fundraiser for a wounded Marine. I almost told him to get lost." "What changed your mind?" "He told me about the Marine. 23 years old, lost both legs to an IED, family couldn't afford to modify their home for wheelchair access. I remembered being 23, remembered what it felt like to need help and be too proud to ask for it." Hartley leaned back in the booth. "I organized that fundraiser. We raised enough money to modify the home and then some. And I realized something. I'd spent 10 years running from my service, trying to pretend it never happened. But it did happen. And I could either let it eat me alive, or I could use what I learned to help people." Sarah understood what he was doing, drawing parallels, showing her a path forward. It was manipulative, but it was also kind. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this." "Nobody ever is," Hartley said. "But ready or not, you're already making a difference. You know how many calls I've gotten since Friday night? 12. 12 veterans from the area who heard about you and wanted to know how they could get involved with the association. One of them is a former Army medic who's been home for 6 months and hasn't left his apartment. He called me yesterday and asked if he could come to our next meeting." "Because of what happened at the bar." "Because of you," Hartley corrected. "Because you showed him that someone who's done what you've done can come home and keep going. That's powerful, Sarah. That's hope." They finished their lunch, and Hartley walked Sarah to her car. Before she left, he handed her a folder containing information about the Veterans Association, meeting schedules, current programs, financial reports. "Look it over," he said. Come to our next meeting Thursday night just to see what we're about. No pressure, no commitment. Just show up and see if it feels right." Sarah took the folder, nodding noncommittally. As she drove home, she thought about Dr. Caldwell's offer and Colonel Hartley's invitation. Two opportunities to do something meaningful, to take her experience and use it to help others. A week ago, she would have dismissed both out of hand. But something had shifted since Friday night, since Jake had spoken her call sign in that crowded bar and forced her to confront who she really was. That evening, Sarah found herself in the garage, rummaging through boxes she'd shipped home from base but never unpacked. She found what she was looking for near the bottom of the third box, a photograph in a simple black frame. It showed her and Webb standing in front of their Apache helicopter, both grinning at the camera, flight suits dusty and faces sunburned. Webb had his arm around her shoulders, and she was giving him bunny ears. It had been taken the day before their accident, during a rare moment of downtime. Sarah carried the photograph into the house and set it on the dresser in her bedroom, where she could see it every morning when she woke up. Webb's smile seemed to challenge her, to ask what she was doing with the life he no longer had. "I'm working on it," she said quietly to the photograph. "I promise I'm working on it." Thursday night, Sarah drove to the Veterans Association meeting at the community center. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching people go inside, before she finally forced herself to open the door and follow them. The meeting room was bigger than she'd expected, with about 30 people scattered across rows of folding chairs. Colonel Hartley spotted her immediately and waved her over to a seat near the front. "Glad you made it," he said. The meeting started with the usual business: minutes from the last gathering, reports on ongoing projects, updates about members who were sick or struggling. Sarah half listened, her attention caught by the diversity of the group. There were men and women, young and old, veterans from every branch and every conflict from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Then Hartley stood to speak. "Before we close," he said, "I want to introduce someone special. Most of you have probably heard by now about the incident at Murphy's Bar last Friday." A ripple of recognition went through the room. "Well, the woman at the center of that incident is here tonight. Sarah Mitchell, call sign Viper 1, one of the finest Apache pilots our military has ever produced. Sarah, would you mind standing?" Sarah's heart hammered as she got to her feet, feeling dozens of eyes on her. "Sarah's home after 3 years of combat operations," Hartley continued. "And I've asked her to consider joining our association in a leadership role. But before she makes that decision, I thought maybe we could show her what we're about. Who wants to start?" A man in his 50s stood up wearing a Navy ball cap. "I'm Rick Patterson, served 2 tours on a carrier in the Gulf. When I got home, I couldn't find work, ended up sleeping in my car. The guys here helped me get back on my feet, found me a job, got me into an apartment, saved my life." A younger woman raised her hand. "Maria Santos, Army National Guard. I did a year in Afghanistan, came home with PTSD so bad I couldn't leave my house. The association connected me with a therapist, paid for my sessions until my benefits kicked in. 3 years later, I'm back in school, almost done with my nursing degree." One by one, people stood and shared their stories. Stories of struggle and recovery, of finding purpose after service, of the association helping them when no one else would. Sarah listened, feeling something crack open inside her chest. This was what she'd been missing: community, purpose, a way to take the pain and turn it into something meaningful. When the meeting ended, several people approached to introduce themselves and thank her for her service. Sarah found herself exchanging phone numbers, promising to come to the next meeting, agreeing to help with a fundraiser for homeless veterans. The next morning, Sarah called Dr. Caldwell and accepted the position at the Veterans Outreach Center. The pay was modest, as promised, but the work schedule was flexible enough that she could still help Colonel Hartley with the Veterans Association. She would start in 3 weeks, which gave her time to prepare and complete the required training. Her mother cried when Sarah told her the news. "I'm so proud of you," Linda said, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "Your father would be proud too." Sarah's father had been a Marine, killed in a training accident when she was 12. His death had been part of what drove her to the military, a desire to understand the world that had taken him, to be close to the thing he'd loved enough to die for. "I think he would have told me to stop mopping and get back to work," Sarah said, smiling through her own tears. "Probably," Linda agreed. "He never was one for sitting still." The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into preparing for her new role, reading everything she could about veteran services, attending training sessions in Roanoke, and helping Colonel Hartley plan the Veterans Association's annual fundraiser. She also started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Martinez who specialized in combat trauma. It was harder than Sarah expected, talking about Webb's death, about her guilt and fear and anger. But it was also necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. "You're carrying a lot of weight that isn't yours to carry," Dr. Martinez told her during one session. "Webb's death wasn't your fault. The faulty equipment wasn't your fault. The only thing you're responsible for is how you move forward." "That's what everyone keeps telling me," Sarah said. "But you don't believe it yet." "No," Sarah admitted, "not yet." "That's okay. Belief takes time. Keep showing up, keep doing the work, and one day you'll realize you've started to let it go." Sarah wasn't sure she believed that either, but she kept showing up anyway. Her first day at the Veterans Outreach Center was nerve-wracking. Dr. Caldwell gave her a tour of the facility, introduced her to the staff, and explained her responsibilities. Sarah's office was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking a courtyard where veterans often gathered to talk. "Your first client is scheduled for 10 o'clock, Dr. Caldwell said, handing Sarah a file. "Marcus Rodriguez, Army Infantry, 2 tour in Iraq. He's been struggling with employment and housing." Sarah opened the file, scanning the information. Rodriguez was 31, honorably discharged 3 years ago, currently living with his sister and working part-time at a warehouse. He wanted full-time work, but kept getting passed over for jobs despite his qualifications. When Rodriguez arrived, Sarah recognized the look in his eyes, the wariness, the shame, the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting too long with no victory in sight. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said, shaking his hand. "Please have a seat." They talked for an hour. Rodriguez told her about his service, his injuries, mostly psychological, the kind that didn't show up on X-rays. He talked about applying to dozens of jobs, making it to final interviews, then watching employers' enthusiasm fade when they realized he was a veteran with gaps in his employment history. "I did everything I was supposed to do," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "I served my country, I got my education using the GI Bill, I have good references. But nobody wants to hire a guy who spent 2 years dodging IEDs in Fallujah. They smile and thank me for my service, then give the job to someone else." Sarah understood his anger because she'd felt it herself. The betrayal of coming home to find that the skills that made you valuable in combat meant nothing in the civilian world. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "The job market is tough for veterans. A lot of employers don't understand what we bring to the table, but that doesn't mean there aren't good opportunities out there. We just have to find the right fit." She spent the next week working with Rodriguez, revising his resume, preparing him for interviews, and leveraging her contacts to connect him with veteran-friendly employers. By Friday, he had 3 interviews scheduled with companies that actively recruited veterans. "I don't know how to thank you," Rodriguez said when she told him about the interviews. "Thank me by nailing those interviews," Sarah replied. "And when you get hired, remember how you felt right now. Someday, you might be in a position to help another veteran. When that day comes, pay it forward." Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with dozens of veterans, men and women dealing with employment issues, housing insecurity, disability claims, family problems, and substance abuse. Each case was different, but they all shared a common thread: people who'd given everything to their country and now felt forgotten by it. Sarah found herself thinking about Webb constantly during this time. He would have loved this work, she realized. He'd always been the one talking to new pilots, making them feel welcome, offering advice and encouragement. In a way, doing this work felt like honoring his memory, using her position to help people the way Webb had always helped her. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sarah was locking up her office when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. "Sarah, it's Jake Morrison." She felt a smile cross her face, surprised by how glad she was to hear his voice. "Jake, how are you?" "Good, busy. I've been meaning to call for weeks, but things got crazy with a deployment." He paused. "I heard through the grapevine that you took a job with a veterans center." News travels fast. Military's a small world. I'm proud of you, Sarah. That's important work you're doing. They talked for half an hour, catching up on the past month. Jake told her about his latest assignment, carefully avoiding classified details. Sarah told him about her work at the center and with the Veterans Association. "You sound different," Jake observed. "Lighter, maybe." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "I'm not going to pretend everything's fixed. I still have bad days, still wake up sometimes thinking about Webb, but I'm starting to see a way forward." That's all anyone can ask for. Before they hung up, Jake mentioned that he'd be passing through Virginia again in a few weeks. "Maybe we could grab dinner," he suggested. "I'd like to hear more about what you're doing." "I'd like that," Sarah said. After the call ended, she sat in her car in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the mountains. For the first time since Webb's death, she felt like she might actually be okay. The Veterans Association fundraiser was scheduled for a Saturday in mid-November. They'd rented the high school gymnasium and were expecting over 200 people. The event would include dinner, a silent auction, and speeches from local politicians and military officials. All proceeds would go to helping homeless veterans in the area. Sarah had been heavily involved in planning, using her organizational skills from the military to coordinate volunteers, solicit donations, and manage logistics. Colonel Hartley had been impressed by her work, already talking about her taking over more responsibilities within the association. The night of the fundraiser, Sarah arrived early to help with setup. The gym was transformed with banners, tables decorated in patriotic colors, and a stage for speakers. Volunteers bustled around, arranging auction items and setting up the catering. As guests began arriving, Sarah worked the room, greeting people and answering questions about the cause. She was introduced to the mayor, several city council members, and the superintendent of schools. Everyone seemed genuinely interested in the work the association was doing. Then she saw him. Tommy Brennan stood near the entrance with his parents, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. When his eyes met Sarah's, he quickly looked away. Colonel Hartley appeared at her elbow. "Tom and Margaret Brennan are longtime supporters," he said quietly. "They've donated to the association for years. Their son—" He trailed off diplomatically. "It's fine," Sarah said. "I can be professional." She didn't seek Tommy out, but eventually their paths crossed near the refreshment table. He was alone, his parents having moved off to talk with friends. "Sarah," he said awkwardly, "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm the vice president of the association." "Right, of course." Tommy shifted his weight, unable to meet her eyes. "Look, about what happened at Murphy's. I was drunk and I was wrong. What I said was inexcusable." Sarah studied him for a moment. He looked miserable, ashamed, and she realized that holding onto anger about his behavior would only hurt herself. "We all make mistakes, Tommy, But maybe next time, ask questions before you make assumptions about people." "Yeah, I will," he nodded, still not looking at her. "For what it's worth, I told my uncle about you, the one with the real estate office. He said if you're ever interested in a job, the offer stands, but not as a receptionist, as an agent. He said someone with your skills could do really well in commercial real estate." It was an olive branch, awkwardly offered but sincere. Sarah accepted it with grace. "Thank you. I'm happy where I am right now, but I appreciate the offer." The fundraiser was a massive success. By the end of the night, they'd raised over $50,000, far more than their goal. Colonel Hartley gave a speech thanking everyone who'd contributed, and then he called Sarah up to the stage. "I want to introduce you all to our new vice president," he said, gesturing for her to join him. "Captain Sarah Mitchell has only been with us for a short time, but she's already made an incredible impact. Her vision, her passion, and her dedication to helping our brothers and sisters in arms has revitalized this organization. Please join me in thanking her for her service, both to our country and to our community." The applause was thunderous. Sarah stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, veterans and their families, community members, people who cared about the cause, and felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. This was her new mission. Not flying helicopters or leading troops into combat, but fighting a different kind of battle. The battle to ensure that veterans received the support, respect, and opportunities they deserved. It wasn't the sky, but it was important. It mattered. After the event, Sarah was helping clean up when her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Saw photos from your fundraiser on the association's Facebook page. Looks like it was amazing. So proud of you, Viper 1. She smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Dinner offer still stands when you're in town." His reply came immediately, "Absolutely. I'll call you next week to set it up." Driving home that night, Sarah passed Murphy's bar. The parking lot was full, music drifting through the open door. She thought about stopping in, about walking through that door with her head held high, no longer hiding from who she was or what she'd done. But she kept driving. She didn't need to prove anything to the people in that bar. She'd already proven it to herself. Jake called the following Tuesday to let her know he'd be in the area that weekend. They agreed to meet for dinner Saturday night at a restaurant in Roanoke, halfway between Bridgeport and the naval facility where Jake had meetings. Sarah spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. This wasn't a date, at least. She didn't think it was, but she wanted to look nice. She finally settled on dark jeans and a green sweater that her mother said brought out her eyes. The restaurant was upscale but not pretentious, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. Jake was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table. He stood when he saw her, and Sarah was struck again by his presence, the way he carried himself with confidence but not arrogance. "You look great," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thanks, you too." They ordered wine and appetizers, falling into easy conversation. Jake told her about his recent assignment, a training exercise with NATO forces that had been both challenging and rewarding. Sarah shared stories about her work at the Veterans Outreach Center, including Marcus Rodriguez's success. He'd landed a job as a logistics manager at a manufacturing company and was already thriving. "You're making a real difference," Jake said. "I hope you know that." "I'm starting to," Sarah admitted. "It's not the same as flying, but it matters. That's enough." As dinner arrived, Jake's expression turned more serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night at Murphy's when I asked about your call sign, you looked like you wanted to disappear, but tonight you're talking about your work with pride. What changed?" Sarah took a sip of wine, considering her answer. "I think I realized that I was letting Webb's death define me. I was so focused on what I'd lost, my co-pilot, my ability to fly without fear, my sense of purpose, that I couldn't see what was still possible. And now," Now I'm trying to honor his memory by living the kind of life he would have wanted me to live. He was always helping people, always making sure everyone around him was okay. I can't bring him back, but I can keep that part of him alive through the work I do." Jake nodded slowly. That's a good way to look at it. They finished dinner and lingered over coffee, neither wanting the evening to end. Eventually, Jake paid the check despite Sarah's protests, and they walked out to the parking lot together. "I had a great time tonight," Jake said. "I'd like to do this again if you're interested." Sarah felt her heart skip. "I'd like that too." "Good," Jake smiled. "I should warn you, though, my schedule is unpredictable. I might have to cancel at the last minute or be deployed for weeks at a time." "I understand. I was military too, remember?" "Yeah, but that's different. That was your job. This is," he gestured between them, "whatever this is becoming." "I'm okay with unpredictable," Sarah said. "I've had enough predictable to last a lifetime." Jake pulled her into a hug, warm, solid, reassuring. "Drive safe, Sarah Mitchell." "You too, Lieutenant Commander Morrison." On the drive home, Sarah called her mother to check in. Linda answered on the first ring as always. "How was dinner?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. "It was good, Mom, really good." "Are you going to see him again?" "I think so, if we can make the schedules work." "I'm happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve this. You deserve to be happy." After hanging up, Sarah drove through the quiet streets of Bridgeport, thinking about happiness and what it meant. For so long, happiness had been synonymous with flying, the freedom of the sky, the precision of combat, the camaraderie of her unit. She'd believed that losing the ability to fly meant losing any chance at happiness. But maybe happiness wasn't so narrow. Maybe it could be found in helping Marcus Rodriguez find a job, in planning fundraisers with Colonel Hartley, in evening phone calls with Jake Morrison. Maybe it was okay to build a new kind of life, different from what she'd planned but meaningful in its own way. The following Monday, Sarah arrived at the Veterans Outreach Center to find Dr. Caldwell waiting in her office with a man in his late 20s. He was thin, with dark circles under his eyes and the jittery energy of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Sarah, this is Daniel Foster," Dr. Caldwell said, "former Army helicopter pilot. He arrived this morning asking to speak with you specifically." Sarah's attention sharpened. "Have a seat, Daniel. Dr. Caldwell, could you give us a few minutes?" After the director left, Sarah studied the young man across from her. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same haunted expression she'd seen in her own mirror for months. "What can I do for you?" she asked gently. "I heard about you," Daniel said, his words coming fast. "Heard you were Viper One, that you flew Apache, that something happened and you stopped flying. I need to know if it gets better, because right now I can't even look at a helicopter without my hands shaking. I lost my co-pilot and the Army says I'm cleared to fly again, but I can't. I just can't." Sarah felt her heart clench. This was Webb's gift, she realized, the ability to take her pain and use it to help someone else carrying the same weight. "It gets better," she said firmly. "Not quickly and not easily, but it does get better. Tell me about your co-pilot." For the next 2 hours, Daniel told her everything. The mission, the crash, the guilt, the nightmares, the feeling that he'd failed. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally sharing her own experiences with Webb, showing him that he wasn't alone in what he felt. "What if I never fly again?" Daniel asked finally, his voice breaking. "Being a pilot is all I know. It's all I ever wanted to be." "Then you figure out what comes next," Sarah said. "Maybe you'll fly again someday, or maybe you'll find a different way to serve. Either way, you're not broken, you're healing. There's a difference." She spent the next several weeks working closely with Daniel, connecting him with Dr. Martinez for therapy, helping him navigate his military benefits, and simply being there when he needed someone who understood. Slowly, she watched him begin to stabilize, to find solid ground beneath his feet. One afternoon in December, Daniel came to her office with news. "The Army offered me a position as a training instructor," he said. "I'd teach new pilots at Fort Rucker. It's not flying combat, but it's still flying. And it's still serving." "Are you going to take it?" Sarah asked. "I think so. If I can help train the next generation, make sure they're as prepared as possible for what's out there. That feels right. That feels like honoring what my co-pilot and I did together." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "He'd be proud of you." "Yeah," Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I think he would be." After he left, Sarah sat in her office for a long time, looking at the photograph of Webb she'd brought from home and placed on her desk. She'd been so focused on her own grief, her own loss, that she hadn't fully appreciated the opportunity she'd been given to take that grief and transform it into something that helped others. "Thank you," she whispered to the photograph, "for showing me how to do this." That evening, she attended the Veterans Association meeting. Colonel Hartley had an announcement. "As most of you know, I'll be stepping down as president at the end of the year," he said. "I've been doing this for 20 years and it's time for new leadership. The board has voted, and I'm pleased to announce that our new president, effective January 1st, will be Sarah Mitchell." The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility settle over her shoulders like a mantle. "I'm honored by your trust," she said when the applause died down. "I know I have big shoes to fill. Colonel Hartley has built something incredible here, and I promise to do everything I can to continue his legacy while also bringing new energy and ideas to our work. Thank you all for welcoming me into this community." After the meeting, as people congratulated her, Sarah's phone rang. It was Jake. "Congratulations, Madam President," he said. "I saw the email blast from the association." News travels fast. It does in the military community. Listen, I have some news of my own. I'm being transferred to Norfolk permanently. I'll be heading a new training program for naval special operations. Sarah's heart leaped. Norfolk was less than 4 hours from Bridgeport. "That's wonderful, Jake. I was thinking, if you're interested, maybe we could make this thing between us a real thing. No more uncertainty, no more schedules getting in the way, just us figuring it out together." "I'm interested," Sarah said, unable to keep the smile out of her voice. "Good, because I'm falling for you, Sarah Mitchell, and I wanted you to know before this goes any further." "I'm falling for you too," she admitted. Christmas came, and Sarah spent it with her mother, and for the first time with Jake, who'd driven up from Norfolk to join them. Linda made her famous pot roast, and they spent the evening telling stories and laughing around the fireplace. Later, as Jake was getting ready to leave, he pulled Sarah aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small wrapped box. Inside was a compass, old and beautifully crafted, with an inscription on the back, "Not all who wander are lost." "It belonged to my grandfather," Jake explained. "He gave it to me when I joined the Navy, told me it would help me find my way home. I want you to have it now." "Jake, I can't take this. It's a family heirloom." "That's exactly why I want you to have it." He closed her fingers around the compass. "Because you're becoming part of my family, and because I think you've finally found your way home." Sarah looked down at the compass, its needle pointing steadily north, and felt something settle deep in her chest. He was right. She had found her way home, not back to the sky, but to something even more important: purpose, community, love. "Thank you," she whispered. The new year arrived, and with it, Sarah's first day as president of the Veterans Association. She had big plans, expanding their outreach programs, partnering with local businesses to create more job opportunities for veterans, and establishing a mentorship program that would pair experienced veterans with those newly returned from service. One cold morning in January, exactly 1 year after Webb's death, Sarah drove to the small veterans cemetery outside of town. She'd avoided coming here, unable to face the reality of Webb's grave. But today felt different. Today felt right. She found his headstone easily. Marcus Webb, Captain, U.S. Army, beloved husband and father. Someone had left fresh flowers, probably his wife bringing their daughter to visit. Sarah knelt in the grass, not caring about the cold or the damp. "Hey, Webb," she said quietly. "I know I should have come sooner, but I wasn't ready. I'm not sure I'm ready now, but I needed to tell you some things." She talked for a long time, telling him about her work at the center, about the Veterans Association, about Daniel Foster and Marcus Rodriguez, and all the other veterans she'd helped. She told him about Jake, about finding love when she least expected it. She told him about learning to live with the grief instead of being consumed by it. "I think about you every day," she said finally. "Every time I help someone, every time I make a difference, I think about how you would have done it better with more grace and kindness than I'll ever have. But I'm trying, Webb. I'm trying to live the kind of life that honors what you gave. I hope that's enough. I hope wherever you are, you're proud." The wind rustled through the trees, and Sarah chose to believe it was Webb's answer. She stood brushing grass from her knees and noticed someone approaching from across the cemetery. As the figure got closer, she recognized Tommy Brennan. He looked uncertain, nervous. "Sarah," he said, "I didn't know you'd be here. I can come back another time." "No, it's okay. Were you visiting someone?" Tommy nodded toward a grave 3 rows over. "My older brother. He died in Iraq in 2006. I was only 14. Sarah hadn't known. "I'm sorry." "That's part of why I was such a jerk to you," Tommy said. "My brother was my hero, and when he died, I was so angry. At the military, at the war, at everyone who came home when he didn't. When I saw you, heard you'd been in combat, I took all that old anger out on you. It was wrong. Thank you for telling me that." "I've been coming to the Veterans Association meetings," Tommy continued. "In the back where you wouldn't notice. Listening. Learning. Trying to understand what my brother went through, what you've all gone through. I want to help if you'll let me. I'm good with computers, and I heard you're trying to update the association's website." Sarah studied him, seeing genuine remorse and the desire to make amends. Everyone deserved a second chance. She of all people knew that. "We meet Tuesday nights," she said. "Come to the next one, not in the back but up front. We can always use volunteers." Tommy's relief was visible. "Thank you, really." After he left, Sarah stood between the gravestones, thinking about forgiveness and redemption and the strange paths that led people to where they needed to be. Webb had brought her here to this moment, this place. His death had broken her, but in healing, she'd found a new purpose, a new life. She wasn't Viper One anymore. She was Sarah Mitchell, veteran, advocate, leader, and survivor. She was someone who'd lost everything and learned to build something new from the ruins. She was someone who'd faced her demons and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. And that, she realized, was enough. As she walked back to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Dinner tonight. My place. I'll cook." She smiled and typed back, "Perfect, see you at 7. The sun broke through the winter clouds as Sarah drove out of the cemetery, and for the first time in a year, she felt truly at peace. The sky above was clear and blue, stretching endlessly forward, full of possibility. She didn't need to fly anymore to feel free. She'd found freedom right here, on solid ground, surrounded by people who needed her and people she needed in return. This was her mission now, and she would carry it out with the same dedication and courage she'd brought to every mission before.